My name is Alex, and I'm speaking about using TypeScript with CouchDB and Pouch. So why? PouchDB has had TypeScript support for ages, but there's quite little information about how to use it anywhere, really. So this is basically me just going on a little adventure and trying to figure out how to best use it, and you're all coming with me. And in the end, we hopefully have a better idea of how it works and whether it's worth doing. Alright, so on the PouchDB website, there are some instructions how to set up TypeScript, and it covers, installing the types and adding something to the TypeScript JSON, and then how to import PouchDB, and that's about it. So if that's all there is, let's just try it out. It's 2023, so we're going to use Vite because that's the current thing, and we're going to use Svelte because I've done enough React in my life, and Svelte is fun. So npm create Vite, install PouchDB and the types for PouchDB. We add that allow synthetic default imports thing to the TypeScript config. Then I assume the asterisk in the import is a synthetic import. Then we do npm run dev, and off we go. No, we don't. This immediately breaks. And this breaks for nearly everyone who tries this, as you'll find in a variety of Stack Overflow threads and GitHub issues. And we haven't even done anything yet. But thankfully there are loads of workarounds, many of which work. I just picked one that I thought was quite consistent in how it worked and doesn't require you to do very much. There's some node polyfills for Vite, so we install that as a dev dependency, add it to the Vite config, and now we are really off. Yay. Okay, but now what? How do we type PouchDB? So there is one more piece of, let's say, documentation in the form of a gist from 2016. It looks like this. And the fun bit is in line 8, where we're passing a type to the PouchDB constructor. So we're saying, this instance of PouchDB is handling person data types. This gist is also useful if you ever want to figure out how old Nolan Lawson is. So just add the 2016 to his age here. But now, right off the bat, I'm thinking, I often have more than one type of document per database, and not just one. That might just be me, I don't know, but that's how I use Pouch at least, so Well, anyway, let's worry about this later and just roll with this one type per instance thing and see how far we get. So first off, let's define our types. I have some types, some data flying around in my CouchDB. I have some to-do documents, and I have a config document, and they're all in the same database. From a different app, doesn't really matter. These are the types for those. And as you can see, I use the pattern where all of the documents in my CouchDB have a type key, so they're a bit easier to tell apart. So yeah, let's try and do something with this. So import the asterisk thing, add one of the types to the constructor, and we get an error. So maybe let's not add the asterisk, let's just import it the way we usually do, and now this works. And I think now we finally jumped through all the hoops. Let's see what happens. That looks pretty cool. So let's loop around again to the beginning. AllDocs gives us all the properties from the AllDocs request. That's cool. We go into the rows, we select the first item in the row, get all of the keys from that. That's cool. And the doc knows about the CouchDB meta keys and the keys that belong to the to-do item. So this is perfect. This is exactly what we want. And that's already a really nice developer experience, in my opinion. So that's cool. So just to recap how we got here, there's a few jumpable hoops, but PouchDB and TypeScript generally works in a modern dev environment. So that's cool. You declare your document types without specifying any CouchDB metadata keys like _ID for now. When instantiating a PouchDB, you pass in that type to the constructor. That's apparently how this works. And then all the docs in the subsequent uses of that PouchDB instance will be correctly typed. And as a bonus, all of the method calls and all of the options for the method calls are also documented and autocompletable in your IDE. So you're never worrying about, where does the underscore go in this or that key. That's all very great. So let's get back to my complaint from earlier. I often have more than one type of document per database. Right, so TypeScript has union types for this kind of thing. So wouldn't this work, where I just add two types to the PouchDB constructor, to do or config? Well, that kind of depends what you want to do later on. So what I frequently end up doing is I do an alldocs request for absolutely everything in a user's database, for example, and then I group by type, and then I do different things to the different types of data, pass them to different views, to stuff like that. And I tend to use Lodash for this. And as you can see, the groups variable that comes out of using group by is typed correctly. So it's an object, and it has the PouchDB generic for an existing document. That is either a to-do or a config, and is also intersected with the alldocs metadata info. This is basically all of the autocomplete stuff you just saw. So groups is typed perfectly, but the stuff inside groups isn't. So while we know that all of that, the to-do key in the groups contains all of the to-dos, and the config key contains all of the configs, TypeScript can't follow through the group by to infer this correctly. So if you remember, we have one key per doc that's called type, which determines the type, and what this is called in TypeScript land is a discriminated union, where the type key is our discriminator, and TypeScript can infer the discriminating key and even the possible values for the types, but it can't follow that through this group by function, or through a filter function, or other things like that. That's a bit disappointing. So what can we do? Can we nudge it a bit? Because we know what the groups are, but if we do it like this, as you can see in the last two lines, we're casting the to-dos as an array of to-do types, and we're casting the config as a single config. This is a bad idea, because then we lose all of those tasty PouchDB generics we got from doing it the proper way. So you'd no longer have underscore ID, underscore rev, conflicts, all of those things wouldn't be there anymore. That's not cool. So we need to nudge it a bit more, maybe, so we actually type it as what it really is with the generic, and yeah, this works and the types are 100% correct, but this just doesn't look nice. And then basically you don't need to type the constructor, because you're not using the types up there, and it's all a bit messy and adds potential for error. What we'd really like is not to have to cast this and have the discriminated union, de-unionize itself for us, and TypeScript inferral just working. But I just could not find a way that actually works. And this seems to be quite a problem that TypeScript is grappling with generally, at least from what I could find. I'm not a TypeScript expert, so maybe someone else knows more. But I found this to be a bit troubling. On the other hand, if you don't use PouchDB this way, you might not care about this, so yeah. Oh well. Anyway, let's look at discriminated unions without grouping and filtering for now. Let's see. So, just to recap, a discriminated union is when every type in a union, so our union is to do or config, contains a common property, the property is type, with literal types, those are the strings to do or config, then TypeScript considers that to be a discriminated union, and it can narrow down the members of the union. So it's already capable of inferring the correct type, we just need to give it the opportunity to make that distinction. And so if we narrow down the type by the discriminator in our code, so that the if docs0 type is one of our types, TypeScript understands this line and can now infer that docs0 is actually a to-do and therefore has a complete key. So in part this works, it just doesn't work in the context of a group by function or a filter function. So that's cool, but yeah, I mean, there's 0 additional TypeScript in there. This is all just inferral from the first thing we put in the constructor. This is actually quite cool, but it doesn't solve my particular problem. But it does work, so that's cool. So how else could we do this? So after fumbling around with this for a bit longer, I noticed that you can also pass types to PouchDB methods, not just the constructor. So you could have a generic constructor without any types, or an instance rather, and then for a specific or docs or get or whatever method call, you could add types just to that. Now that improved things a lot, in my opinion. However, my document IDs in this example are rubbish, and I can't actually get just the to-dos through an alldocs call because there's other stuff in this database. So I thought, okay, let's use a Mango query with the find plugin. Let's do that instead. So we should be able to get all the to-dos with doing PouchDB instance.find, giving it the type, passing it in a selector. But no, the typing for the find plugin works differently than the typing for the PouchDB core methods, and you can't specify the type per method. So back to square one. With find, we're limited to specifying the type per PouchDB instance. But if you do this, it works, and it's actually pretty cool. And now the question is, obviously you're not, at least I'm never doing this, that I have different PouchDB instances per document type. I mean, you could conceivably write your code that way, although it feels bad writing it differently just to make TypeScript happy. But how bad would this be performance-wise in a real-world scenario? I don't know, and that's out of scope for this talk. Right. Let's look at one more thing. Let's look at creating documents. So, yeah, this is fairly pedestrian. We have a new variable. We tell it it's a to-do. We add all the keys for that to-do. They all get type checked and auto-completed, and that's all very nifty. But what if we have meaningful IDs in our documents, and I want to specify an ID? If I try to set that here, it would give us an _ID error. It doesn't exist in type to-do. All right, that's strictly speaking true. It doesn't, so what do we do? So thankfully there are a bunch of useful generic types in PouchDB core, so let's use one. We're using PouchDB core document as the generic and passing it the to-do type. And now that does have an _ID key that we can set. And this makes sense, right? So if the to-do is, existing strictly outside of CouchDB, then its type should not know about CouchDB internals. I think to me this pattern just makes sense. I find it's nice because it doesn't leak CouchDB implementation details into your business logic and the typings. Of course, you can always add _ID to your types if you really want to, and it doesn't feel iffy for you. Go ahead, it won't break anything. And if you're in doubt, you can always just poke around in the index DTS in PouchDB core to see what the various generics are and what they include. It's quite readable and well documented. It's all a bit nested in a way. Sometimes it's difficult to figure out which things are inside which other things, but I mean, you'll figure it out. You're all smart people. And yeah, this is all quite usable. So where does that leave us all in all? Right, so what's good? The PouchDB types just by themselves are already worth it, I think, for the checking that you're using them correctly, for the autocomplete and for the inline documentation in the IDE, for the method calls, for all of the option objects, all of that. That's cool. What's also good is that the types absolutely do not need to concern themselves with the CouchDB meta keys. You never have to touch them if you're doing it right. That's good. And creating docs, replications, changes, feeds, all of that, getting individual documents, stuff like that, all works really nicely and like you'd expect it to. Bad is, for me at least, that the discriminated unions thing almost works, but there just doesn't seem to be a clean and easy way to group or filter the docs after you've fetched them while preserving their complete types. And so therefore you'd have to use workarounds. If you use If you store different doc types per database, you might need to have multiple differently typed calls to fetch the data, or multiple differently typed PouchDB instances to fetch the data. And nah, neither is fantastic. I could live with the first, the second just feels iffy to me. And interesting find, you can't pass types to the find method, whereas you can pass types to all of the other core methods. And the ugly, if you want to have multiple types per DB method and then you just must group or filter those, the current workaround is to recast them with the added generics, and that looks messy and adds complexity and opportunities for human error, so I'm not a fan. In an emergency, I'd probably do it anyway, but I wouldn't feel good about it. And yeah, there's no real documentation, so if you want to know how anything works, you need to read the DTS files. Which is definitely a point where this experience can be improved. But yeah, all in all, how could this be better? Well, of course, we could try and figure out a generic way to extract from discriminated unions. That seems to be more in TypeScript land than in Pouch land. We could evaluate the performance impact of having multiple PouchDB instances. How bad is this actually? I don't know. Maybe somebody knows. Someone could update the find method type so it works like the others in core, and of course the PouchDB docs in general could be improved. That would make the experience a lot more streamlined. But yeah, all in all, after going through all of this, is it worth it? And I'd say yes. I definitely find it useful, even though I do realize that talking about end-to-end type safety in a database where every document can basically have any shape, yeah, I know, but in reality, your business data has specific shapes, and knowing the types in the front end is definitely worth it, or wherever you consume them. But yeah, that being said, what do you all think, and how have your TypeScript experiences been, if any?